What's good, y'all? Hey, man, playoff basketball yesterday was crazy. Shout out to the playoff hoops. Denver officially beats the Lakers in 5 games, not 4, 5 games. The Minnesota Timberwolves from the other 2 days ago also swept the Suns in 4 games. So we have a sweep and we have a gentleman's sweep that puts the Denver Nuggets on a crash course with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But before we get to that matchup, let's focus a little bit on what Denver did last night. So Denver versus the Lakers, to me, that was the headline from all the games that we saw. OKC handled their business. Celtics also handled their business, but KP got injured. More on that in a future video. But I gotta say this, man. Anthony Davis has 16 points in the first half of this game, and I'm pretty sure he finished with 17 for the game. The way that they have not utilized Anthony Davis for a lot of this series in the second halves, to me, is god awful. But again, and I'll say this later too, a lot of that is also on Anthony Davis to just flat out demand the ball in spots. This Lakers team is pretty awful. And when I say awful, the 2 players have performed for the most part. The role players have not. The reason why there's a gap between Denver and the Lakers is the Lakers are not a great constructed basketball team. The fact that D'Angelo Russell shot 2 for 10 from 3 and took 15 shots to score 14. The fact that Rui Hachimura had 15 points on 15 shots, where Rui in the series was looked at to be a positive headed into the series. And instead, it's like, if he doesn't score, what is he doing for you? Because he's not rebounding, he's not playing defense. It's just a shame how bad the construction has been. And then also Darvin Ham's management of that poor construction has also been bad. LeBron and AD have really been the only consistent bright spots for this Lakers team. The backcourt between D'Lo and Austin Reeves have fluctuated game by game by game. And in this game, it was really no different. Jamal Murray deserves a tremendous shout out because he was going through some calf strain issues and whatnot, but he played through it in game 5. And honestly, I think he had his overall most productive game in the series, to be honest. I mean, Jamal Murray had 32 points, 7 assists, 5 for 10 from 3 with another playoff game winner. That's a walk-off. The Lakers have no timeouts. They couldn't score, and it was game. So Jamal showed up well, but I got to be honest. If we're talking about the series and who the MVP of the series was outside of Jokic, because obviously he's the best player, even though in his last game, even though I think Jokic put up some gaudy stats, Jokic really wasn't all that great by his standards. But Michael Porter Jr. deserves a ton of credit. MPJ deserves a ton of credit, love, and support. I mean, this man basically averaged 24 points per game on wildly efficient shooting. Even in the closeout game, Michael Porter Jr. shot 5 for 7 from 3. We were seeing very good performances from him. And honestly, on this Nuggets team that is less deep from last year, they needed his shooting to survive in this series versus the Los Angeles Lakers. MPJ made timely shots the entire series. His rebounding game was pretty solid for the entire series as well. His decision making was good. I mean, he was a plus 12 in this game with 26 points. For MPJ to be outputting multiple 20+ point games in this series, it's the reason why Denver was on a whole other tier than the Lakers, despite the fact that Denver was making a lot of mistakes, which kind of speaks to how good Denver is to get let off the hook in this series because the Lakers just aren't good enough to execute in the second halves of ball games. But credit to Denver. They handled their business. For the Los Angeles Lakers, they fought, man. They tried. This was a close series in terms of games, but it really wasn't that close just in terms of the execution we saw from these teams. Anthony Davis deserves a ton of credit. By far the second best player in the series. He rose every single game for the most part. In this game, he didn't play all that well to his standard compared to all the other games, but it's hard to ask a guy to drop 30 for every single game of the series. And that's what he was doing effectively up until this game. He had phenomenal first halves. I understand that down the stretch in the fourth quarters for many games, the offense goes away from Anthony Davis. He was not productive. I think a lot of that is on how the coaches were utilizing him, but that's also on Anthony Davis to demand the ball and, you know, try to be more aggressive in these spots. But ultimately, yeah, he played hard, wasn't enough. LeBron James still performed in multiple games in this series, but his defense in some spots left a lot to be desired. Aaron Gordon is another guy we're not going to talk about, but deserves a ton of credit. He was the backbone of this Denver team, doing all of the hustle plays, the dirty work. He had 13 rebounds in the closeout game, 6 assists, a steal, a block, only had 7 points. But he also had damn near a 30-point game in other games of this series. The supporting cast for Denver, in terms of their starting five, they show why they're still one of the most complete teams in the league. KCP didn't even have a great series like that, but defensively, he showed you a lot of promise, a lot of poise. And with MPJ and Gordon being their guys that did everything else, where MPJ provides the spacing and Aaron Gordon provides the rebounding, that's why Denver was so good. But shout out to the Lakers. Their series is officially over. Denver moves on. And now we get to the other matchup, which I didn't get a chance to talk about. The Minnesota Timberwolves, who got the brooms out, people. The Minnesota Timberwolves officially got the brooms out. They packed up the Phoenix Suns in 4 games. And a lot of people, again, I want to bask in this moment. A lot of people before the season started did not have the Timberwolves as a legitimate playoff team. A lot of them had them in the play-in or not even making the play-in for some odd reason. And Minnesota goes through all this. They make it as a 3 seed. They play the Phoenix Suns. In the regular season, the Suns matched up better, but they showed adjustments and poise. Minnesota showed a lot of key things in this Suns series, but more importantly, they just exposed the Suns team for what they are, which is not a great team. They've been fraudulent as a full roster, 1 through 10. The adjustments from Frank Vogel, first off, it's kind of hard to make considering how weak the personnel is outside of the big 3, but ultimately, that's what the Suns get. Because when you say big 3, the point of a big 3 is, hey, we have 3 players that are just so far in the head better of other players in the league that our big 3 is going to overcome the lack of depth around them because they're that talented. And ultimately, that's just not the case. Kevin Durant and Devin Booker were allowed to play their isolation game, and there was a lot of good individual defense, and they were not helping off of shooters. The Suns were not getting up enough 3-point attempts. Booker and Katie were getting ran off and hounded off of the line, especially what Jaden McDaniels did on Devin Booker for most of the series. And that's why they beat them, right? Anthony Edwards, special, 40 points, the dunk, the DX wave. Like, you saw the heart and the passion from the Wolves. And also Karl-Anthony Towns in the closeout game to put up 28 and 10, even though he had foul trouble in other games. I think what they showed you is collectively, they're just a deeper team. And that depth is the biggest reason why they were able to beat the Suns. But now we get to the heavyweight matchup between the Denver Nuggets and the Minnesota Timberwolves, which I've said all season long, the West really comes down to. I felt like the Wolves, in terms of size, in terms of depth, in terms of having a guy that can take over games, I think they were the only other team in the West that can really challenge what Denver does. I understand how good OKC is. I think that the size at a certain point matters for OKC. And we are speaking about the Denver Nuggets, who are the best offensive execution team in the league. I didn't think OKC really stacks up. Now, could they? Maybe. But these two teams are the matchup. Even last year, when it went 5 games for a Wolves team that had a year younger Anthony Edwards with year 1 Gobert, year 1 Cat trying to fit in and see how these things fit after he was coming off an injury last year, on top of having no Jaden McDaniels or Naz Reid for that series. I think that they showed why they were a good matchup for Denver despite all of that. And I think now, if we're talking about adding Jaden McDaniels in on top of what we saw Nickeil Alexander-Walker emerge as in the playoffs last year, I think this is a different playoff series. Now, Denver should still be favored, and that's because they're the title team. They have proven time and time again that their offense can just out-execute when they need to go on runs. Nikola Jokic is still going to be the best player in the series. He's still the best player in basketball. But I think when you look at this Minnesota team, they have the pieces and personnel to match up and beat Denver. So this is not going to be some cakewalk thing where Denver can just sleepwalk for the first 3 quarters of the basketball game and then outrun and outpace a team to 5 games and win. I don't think that's going to be the case for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think this is going to be a serious matchup where the lack of spacing for Denver in terms of having more than 3.5 real spaced on the team is going to get put in question. This is a series where the 2 X factors on both teams are going to matter severely. Why? We're talking about Karl Anthony Towns versus Jamal Murray. I think those 2 are the biggest X factors. And the reason why I say Jamal and not MPJ, even though I think MPJ matters the most in terms of their other guy who can space the floor for them, because if his spacing is not there, this Denver team is a different team. The reason why that matters so much to me for Jamal is, remember, he's still on calf strain. He hasn't looked as great in the playoffs. I understand he had 2 game winners, but if you watched him for the entire Lakers series, he really didn't get a lot of his game going until the latter parts of the game in the 4th quarter. And that worked against a Laker defense that had Austin Reeves and some other players guarding him. But I think when you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, the amount of size with Ant, with Jaden McDaniels, with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who can switch out onto Jamal for the series, I think he's going to have a much harder time. And I think when you have size and length on Jamal, who's also going through some things with his calf, that can swing the series. But more importantly, the depth, right? If you're speaking about depth for Minnesota and also the Lakers, the depth is really going to make the difference, because the Lakers bench wasn't that productive. They had a lot of guys coming in that couldn't really space the floor, were not solid enough decision makers, were not extreme positives defensively. They weren't really that deep. With Minnesota, having Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid alone come off of your bench shifts the entire series. And to be fair, because I've watched hoop, Naz Reid has not been great so far in these playoffs. So I think Minnesota is really going to be looking to try to get him going to, provide a big change in the series. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been phenomenal with his 3-point shot making and his defense on guards on the perimeter. I think that's been swell. But it's a matter of repetition and showing that, hey, we can be a serious team versus a very good offense that's going to make us pay. That's the question for Minnesota. And for Cat, the reason why he has to be the X factor that we're looking at in the series is we've seen time and time again with Cat in the postseason, when his team gets there, he has not been a productive player. We've seen multiple times where the foul trouble gets him out of games. The Memphis series is the biggest example, where when he's not in foul trouble, the Wolves are dominating. They're beating them by a record margin. But when he is in foul trouble, they're a worse basketball team. And without Karl Anthony Towns showing that he can be that true second option, performing in his role, being the mismatch nightmare that he can be at his best, they're going to have problems. Because Cat's passing in the first round was good. I thought a lot of his offensive decision-making at times and his spacing threat was a legitimate thing. But the foul trouble and sometimes the offensive foul that he still would get on screens and sometimes off his own self-creation, where he takes these uncomfortable floaters sometimes, even though he's the bigger player and should just go to the paint aggressively. That's going to be a difference against a team like Denver, who has more size than the Suns do, who will play a better defense than what the Suns could hope to achieve. And more importantly, with the Nikola Jokic matchup, there's going to be moments where Cat is centered on Jokic and he has to not foul. He has to make the right decision. He has to beat Jokic in transition trying to get back. All these things for Cat are going to be significant. And if he's able to answer that call and rise up to that challenge, then they have a real shot to beat Denver. Now, my picks and all that stuff, I'm going to save that for another video as we get closer. Eventually, I'm going to have a podcast where we fully recap the entire first round once all of these series are concluded. I never dropped the official playoff predictions video, but that'll come. But I'm very excited for this matchup. These are going to be 2 of the best teams in the NBA playing each other. And I really feel like this series might be the determining factor in terms of who's going to go to the NBA Finals. Another team could beat one of these other teams, but I think the likelihood compared to these 2 is kind of lower. I think one of these 2 teams is going to the NBA Finals. So I'm locked in. Lock in with me. You know what I'm saying? We're going to be watching basketball for this entire series on playback. I'm also going to be reviewing film every single day of the series when those drop. Their first game is going to be this Saturday, so lock in there. More matchup details and whatnot I'll get into as we get further and further in the week. But yeah, I gotta go to work. Big games yesterday. The Lakers are out of there. What's the future of LeBron in this roster? Is he coming back? Is he re-signing? Is Darvin Ham gone? A lot of questions, but I want to get to those at a further time. I just wanted to address both of these teams and the potential matchup they have coming up. Appreciate all y'all support. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm gonna talk to y'all boys later. It's been gifted. Peace out, people.